Hi, I'm Matt Lockett with the Justice House of Prayer in Washington, D.C. And if you're like me, you've probably caught some of the prophetic words that are beginning to circulate in the church and in the prayer movement that are very concerning. Some of these words are speaking of economic disaster. Some are speaking of terrorism, war and conflicts. Some are speaking of internal strife within the United States related to the elections. Some are even speaking of another pandemic. And so I thought it would be good to take a moment to address not the specific words that are being circulated, but maybe how we are to respond as people of prayer. I believe that right now is a moment that we need to stand strong in the promises of God, stand strong in the long-standing prayer assignments that God has given us, things that we have been praying for many years, and lay hold of those things and call them into these very concerning circumstances. You know, I think we tend to err on the side of like hearing a prophetic word and we either expect it to happen, or if it doesn't happen, we want to call somebody a false prophet. But there's actually another layer that I want you to think about, and that has to do with the place and the role of prayer and intercession in the whole grand mix of things as history is playing out. In 2 Kings chapter 20, there's a fascinating story where Hezekiah has operated in pride and God pronounces judgment against him and the nation. And he delivers a prophetic word, a thus saith the Lord word, to Hezekiah through the prophet Isaiah. The word is, get your house in order, you're going to die, and this is going to happen now. And as Isaiah is leaving, it says that Hezekiah responded he turned his face to the wall. He begins to cry and weep and pray. And before Isaiah is out of the house, God says, things have changed. I need you to go back and give him a different word. Well, the whole thing had changed. The storyline had changed because of how Hezekiah responded to this prophetic word and this warning from God. Now, maybe some of us would be real quick to want to call Isaiah a false prophet. Well, that's absurd. No, the reality is that there was a word given, and if nobody prayed and nobody responded, that is precisely what was going to happen. But that extra layer that few of us ever consider takes place, and it's that layer of prayer and repentance. In this case, Hezekiah himself, the king, is repenting and turning to the Lord. But God says to Isaiah, go back and tell him, I have heard his prayer. I want you to see yourself in that storyline, that when these prophetic words emerge, is there a prayer coming out of us before the throne of grace? Is there a cry that's coming out, identificational repentance and a laying hold in faith of other promises that God has given us, promises of revival in America, promises of prosperity and security, and God turning back the enemy at the gates? I think that right now is a time where the intercessors and the praying church have to stand strong in what God has told us and in the face of these mounting challenges. Now, I want to bring your attention to a couple of things that we feel like the Lord has spoken to us about. And this has been guiding our intercession for the nation in a number of ways, but also the impact of the United States on other nations as well. And the first one is a dream that I had many months ago. And let me just kind of read it so that you can hear it the way that I received it. In the dream, I was with President Biden. We were in a home setting, and we were either in the kitchen or the living room, but it seemed like both. In fact, what seemed like a kitchen island separated the two rooms, so that's why it seemed like both. We were standing and talking, not seated at any point. I believe this is a time that we have to continue to stand. I was standing on the opposite side of the kitchen island from President Biden. There were no security, advisors, or assistants with him. It was just us, and the conversation felt very personal and unguarded. I asked him, "You're the president, so you get to hear everything. What's really going on?" Basically, his response began, and I wrote this in quotes, "You have to understand there must be war so that," and then in the dream, he went on to go into great detail and provide information that I don't remember after waking up. There was a lot of information he gave that had to do with why there needed to be war. But after I woke up, the idea that I was left with was that it seemed like it was about the various ways that war is necessary for nations to work out situations and circumstances. Well, that was a powerful dream, and as we've discussed that here, and as that has guided a lot of our prayer and intercession for the last several months, I believe that the kitchen and the living room is a stark picture here where I believe the living room speaks of us living our lives, or possibly even just how people are living their lives around the world. But there's a kitchen where something is being cooked up. And there's something that stands in between these two things. What's being cooked up is going to have a massive impact on how we live our lives. And in this dream, I'm speaking to the President of the United States, arguably the most powerful leader on the planet. And there's an island that's sitting in between us. I'm standing opposite him, and I'm listening to him describe how war is necessary. But in the dream, I'm standing opposite him. I believe all of the details of this dream are prophetic, at least for me and for J-Hop and how we've prayed, that there is among some, potentially even the elite government leaders of the world, and maybe even another layer beyond that, that there is a desire and an agenda to promote war as a means of sorting things out on a global stage. And I believe that we're to stand against that. Particularly right now, there is an escalation that the enemy wants to bring in the realm of conflict and war. That an escalation, things are going to get hotter and hotter until the entire world is going to be embroiled in war, and nations are going to be pulled into it, whether they want to be or not. And yet I think that there's a role where the intercessors have to take a stand. Now is not the time to sit down. Now is the time to stand opposite that agenda. And when these things are promoted, we have to take a stand against them. I do not believe that now is the time for world war. I do personally believe that world war is coming. I believe that the enemy wants to accelerate that, but I do not believe that that time is now. So there is a place in the spirit where we need to take a stand against those demonic assignments that are manipulating world leaders and nations. Now, let me speak for just a brief moment about that kitchen island. Something is being cooked up right now. And if you've followed along with J-Hop for the last couple of years, you might be aware that there is an intercessory prayer assignment that God has given us for the island of Taiwan. And this is one of these key pressure points in the globe that it has the potential for war and to escalate things on a geopolitical level like, we're not prepared for right now. And so I believe that this island that we're standing around represents the island of Taiwan. Now, let me weave that dream together with another dream that we received last year. We've been traveling to the nation of Taiwan and mobilizing prayer. We've seen tremendous things happening in Taiwan as the church is responding in prayer and intercession and repentance and crying out to God. But this is another dream that I want you to hear. And again, I'm just going to read it as we received it. In the dream, I see Xi Jinping. Now that's the president of China. I see Xi Jinping pacing around a room. He is clutching a folder labeled 2024 elections. He then walks into a big conference room. In the room are two men. He sits down and opens the folder. He pulls out a single piece of paper with a list of countries on it and lays it out in front of the men. The United States and Taiwan are circled at the top of the list. He begins to repeat 2024, 2024, 2024. One of the men say, "They'll be so distracted." The other man said, "But Xi, are you sure?" Xi stands up and begins to pace around the room. He has a stern look on his face. He asked the men, "Who do you think will win? Green, blue, or white?" The men shrug their shoulders. One of them replies, "It depends when the country wants war." She continues to pace around the room and asks, "What about the U.S.?" The other men say they'll be too worried about the scandals. Then all three of them begin to laugh eerily. This is a profound dream because this dream has what we would say has a shelf life. It has a time limit. This is about this year, and specifically, it's about the elections of 2024. Now, Taiwan had their election in January. This dream is from July of last year. Who could have known when we had this dream what the outcome of that election would be? In fact, the dream asks, who do you think will win? Green, blue, or white? Those are the colors of the three parties that contended in the election in January. And the person who had the dream had no idea that that was the case. In fact, the Green Party won that election. And that's significant because from a political standpoint, the Green Party is probably regarded as the most antagonistic toward Beijing. And so she is wondering who's going to win this election over Taiwan. But woven together with that election is the United States election. And the question about how China will respond to Taiwan has to do with how the U.S. is going to come out in our election. In fact, the information is given that we'll be so distracted and we'll be too worried about the scandals. The dream seems to indicate that there would be situations and circumstances regarding the United States election in 2024 that would distract us and worry us to the level that we wouldn't be able to respond to a threat to Taiwan. So I believe that this dream, for the last year, as we've prayed, we believe that this dream has drawn our attention to these handful of months that we're in right now. Now, you could just say, well, that's a prophetic word, and sit back and wait for something horrible to happen, or sit back and wait for something that might not happen and just call it not a word from the Lord. But there's that other layer. I believe this is a warning from the Lord. I believe that this election in the United States is going to be very consequential, not just for the fate of America, but for the fate of many nations, if not all nations around the earth. Now, we believe that God has shown us that the next president of the United States needs to be a wartime president, not somebody who can take us into war, actually someone who can keep us out of war. But I'll go even further and say this, that I believe that the church needs wartime leaders. We need to have this kind of a mindset that we can steward God's purposes in a time of crisis. I believe we need wartime pastors in the pulpit, not peacetime appeasers. Conflict is coming, and we need leaders who can see what God's purposes are in this moment and steward them in a time of crisis. And we need to contend for the church to be focused and not distracted in this process. We need to pray for a lessening of the scandals that are taking place. We need to contend for integrity in our elections so that we're not taken to a place nationally where we cannot respond to real threats that are being planned and devised right now as we speak. So this is, I think, a call for real-time intercession. I wanted to encourage you with this. I wanted to make you aware, but I don't believe it's a time to respond in fear. I never believe it's a time to respond in fear. I believe God has given us warning to teach us how to pray. Now, I want to end with this. This is a book by a man named Walter Wink, and it has one of the most provocative and inspiring chapters on the topic of intercession and prayer that I think I've ever read. But let me just give you a couple of quotes out of this as we end. He says this: intercession is spiritual defiance of what is in the name of what God has promised. Intercession visualizes an alternative future to the one apparently fated by the momentum of current contradictory forces. It infuses the air of a time yet to be into the suffocating atmosphere of the present. He goes on to say, new alternatives become feasible. The unexpected becomes suddenly possible because people on earth have invoked heaven, the home of the possibilities, and have been heard. What happens next happens because people prayed. And let me just give this last bit here. He says, in our intercessions, we fix our wills on the divine possibility latent in the present moment, and then find ourselves caught up in the whirlwind of God's struggle to actualize it. This is that layer that I'm talking about, where the news is going to paint a very serious picture, a concerning picture that doesn't give us much hope. And then even God would warn us with prophecies about these situations, things that are very concerning, things that are very serious. But this is the layer of hope and faith, where God will activate us in the place of prayer and intercession, and we lay a hold of the promises and the possibilities of heaven, and we breathe in that atmosphere of possibilities, and the intercessor exhales that air into the suffocating atmosphere of the present. I'm inspired by that. I hope that helps you. I hope it encourages you as a prayer warrior today. I believe that we have to stand right now and stand for God's purposes in America, stand for God's purposes in Taiwan and other places as well. But let's be encouraged today to continue to stand. Thank you.